So that was step one. Now you understand your cycle a little bit more. You got that sex education class you never really had. You understand what is happening hormonally during the different cycles. Hopefully you can actually remember it a little bit. You actually soaked it in. It wasn't just totally boring for you. So now that you understand what's happening, now we can use that information to go into step two, which is strategize activities, nutrition, and self-care in sync with those hormonal shifts in your cycle. So I'm going to look at it again as each phase. What could you do during this phase to really optimize things and optimize your life so you can show up how you want to show up? So again, we start with menstruation. We start with our period. This is that first week. This is a great time for actual reflection and turning inward. So essentially what's happening here is because of what's happening hormonally, so like our sex hormones really interact heavily with just the different hormones like serotonin, like just different things that affect our brain chemistry as a whole. So as those hormones are shifting and your hormones are at their lowest, the left side of your brain, that more analytical side of your brain, and the right side of your brain, which is more of your feeling side of your brain, they're communicating the most during this time, which is a good thing. So again, we kind of started off as like, oh man, like there's times your cycle where it's just like it really sucks. If you understand what's happening during your cycle, and you can actually learn that each phase has some really cool things about it that you can lean into and you can tap into. So menstruation, again, this is when that left side of your brain, the analytical side, and the right side of your brain, the feeling side, they are talking together better than any other time of the month. That's why you can actually go deep and like you can really get introspective here, and you can actually just like very much synthesize what you want to do about different situations. You can really think about how you feel about life or about work. You can get very, very analytical with things. Like this is a great time to be just like making deep decisions with yourself.
Well, a lot of like self-reflection kind of thing.
Exactly. So like this is an ideal time to just really reflect and evaluate different situations. So like within your work, whether or not you can, if you have complete control over your schedule and you can say, okay, I'm not necessarily going to have meetings during this time, but I'm going to have meetings with myself. I'm going to do a lot of reflection, a lot of just strategic thinking, maybe reflecting on the prior month's numbers, like whatever is relevant, for, of course, for your industry.
Or you're like, hey, do I want to quit my job or do I not want to quit my job? Do I hate my boss? Do I not hate my boss? Kind of thing,
in all honesty, because you might have found that like maybe during the previous week, during that luteal phase, you're feeling a little bit more crazy and you're like, I hate my life. I hate my job. I want to quit. Well, during menstruation, now's the time to actually think about those thoughts a little bit more and be like, do I actually want to? What are the pros and cons of this? Like, let me really consider this and like really weigh this out. So personally, I like to, if possible, because I can control my schedule a bit more, I like to take a little bit of a break from calls and meetings during this time of the month. Take some time to really turn inward, do a little bit more reflection, do more work activities that just leave more space for reflection, but also just give me some joy. Because for a lot of women, you might find, especially if you're more crampy during this time of the month, you might be like, yeah, I want to just like curl up on the couch and just, cuddle up here. But that doesn't mean that you can't have your laptop with you and getting some work done too.
Yeah. What is like training? What is nutrition and all that stuff look for this particular part of the cycle?
Yep. So during your period, definitely encourage you to keep your movement relaxed as a whole. So even if you feel pretty good during your period, like you have zero PMS symptoms at all, just because of where things are at hormonally, it's best to not push yourself during this phase. So like for women I coach who they're following a more structured strength training program to get to a specific goal, even though they're still on their weeks of strength training, this might be a week where maybe we do a deload week, or it might just be a week where like, hey, let's not try and hit any PRs. We're not pushing up any weights. We're not doing any more reps. Let's focus on our quality of movement. Let's really dial in our form this week. Like maybe we notice that we're starting to break down our squat form a little bit. Hey, let's lighten our load a little bit and let's work on our mechanics this week.
And I love that word deload, just to kind of bring a little bit of clarity. It's more so, we're still doing a lot of the same movements. It's just on a much lighter phase where you can really focus on technique, focus on form instead of trying to, lift as heavy as possible. But I also think that that's the importance of a structured strength training program as opposed to women doing random things that they see on TikTok or Instagram or the next influencer, right? Because if you're structuring things to where you can take that deload week, take things a little bit lighter, but you're still making progress towards your composition goals, towards your, whatever your health and body goals are, that's what makes the biggest difference, is because no matter where in your cycle you are, you're still making progress week over week,
Exactly. And so, I mean, really during this phase too, if you feel great, then definitely would just keep up with your normal strength training program, but maybe deload. If you don't feel your best, this might be a great week to just step away from any kind of like structured training. And maybe you're just completely out of the gym. Maybe you're just doing some gentle kind of yoga flows, like do some like yin yoga, maybe going for some long walks. Long walks can also marry well with that like period of reflection. It can be a great time to just go on like a long solo walk, get your movement in that way, but also spend some time with your thoughts and really think. Like there's a lot you can do during this phase. And again, this is an example of why understanding what's happening chemically and biologically within your body during this phase is going to help you mentally, because maybe a woman who doesn't understand what's happening with her cycle, she's doing more of what Omar was just describing, of just randomly finding workouts throughout the month. And like maybe the rest of the month she's sticking to it, feeling good, but then this week comes and she like just feels like she can't motivate herself to do anything, but she's still holding herself to the same standard as the rest of the month. She's like, I should still be, doing that workout, or I should still be going to that like HIIT workout class, but like, why do I feel like I'm struggling? I don't want to go. Like, what's wrong with me? I'm lazy. I suck. She's beating herself up. That's going to carry into the rest of the month too.
Yeah. And the other thing too, I think that happens is that's where people fall off track, and they're like, okay, you know what? That methodology or that training program, whatever, it's just not for me. Let me try something else. And then we jump from one thing to another when we never really see the fruits of our labor because we're not aware of what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Now, nutrition-wise, you also asked about that. Yeah. So this is a great time to make sure that you're getting in plenty of protein and healthy fats, because again, you are bleeding right now, and you need to replace some iron. So leaning into some good red meats or some kidney beans can be really, really great for that. But just making sure that you are keeping energy up as a whole, because during your period, hormones are at their lowest, energy is probably a little bit at its lowest. You need a little bit more energy from food to help your body start to shift into the next phase of actually producing hormones again. Now we move into our next phase, our follicular phase. So now again, estrogen's starting to rise. So serotonin is also rising at this point. Estrogen and serotonin are kind of like married together. So we all know serotonin makes us happy. If you understand when estrogen is shifting throughout your cycle, you can also better understand why you're happier during some parts of your cycle versus others. So follicular is probably when you're going to feel just the happiest over the course of the month. This is a really great time to start to lean into a little bit more like social activities, feeling a little bit more outgoing, starting to do things that just make you happy as a whole, because you naturally are going to be happier. During this time of the month is also a great time with work to actually push yourself a little bit more, because you're naturally happier, you're feeling a little bit better, and the effects on the brain, that what's happening hormonally, is you're going to find you're the most creative at this time of the month. So this is a great week to start some new projects, dive into just creating new things. Movement-wise, you're going to notice that your energy and your stamina are a lot higher. So this can be a really great time to actually push yourself a little bit more in the gym. You can also actually essentially use your stored carbs a little bit more easily at this phase of the month. So anytime we eat carbohydrates, you are storing a certain amount of carbohydrates, which is a good thing.
An energy source.
Yeah, but it's an energy source. But this time of the month, your body is just the most efficient at actually reaching it and using it. So because your body can use that fuel more efficiently, it's like, oh, now I got my like turbo mode button. I can like push that button. I can start to push myself in the gym a little bit more.
Would you say like that's where you can expect a lot of women to be hitting like PRs, like personal records, and really be doing a lot of more of the heavy lifting kind of thing?
So I will say like it kind of depends a little bit. Follicular phase and the next one we're going to talk about, ovulation. One of those two are going to be where you're going to hit PRs. For some women, it might be the follicular phase. It might be that you took it pretty easy during your period. You're feeling really fresh, really ready to go. And you're like, now you're hitting PRs. Huh. For other women, it might be that like you felt pretty bad during your period, and now you're just kind of like getting back into things, and you kind of like start to ramp it up, and then the next week you can start hitting PRs. So in terms of workouts though, if you're the type of person that you really enjoy HIIT workouts, you like just itch to get into a HIIT workout class, this is going to be the time of the month to actually lean into it and do that. If you are somebody that you're, like one of our clients, that we have you on a little bit more of a individualized strength training program, this is a great time to really lean into that training program, start to just actually up your weights, up your number of reps, like push yourself a little bit more during this month or this week of the month.
What about the nutrition side? What do you do there? Or
Yes.
what should you focus on?
So follicular phase, you might notice that your appetite's a little bit lower because your estrogen is rising, so you feel a bit more satisfied. So because you don't have as much cravings, you feel more satisfied as a whole, definitely lean into quality nutrition this point of the month. Like give yourself lots of fresh and colorful foods. More light foods might feel more satisfying for you. They might just like hit the spot a little bit more, but really make sure that you're giving your body plenty of nutrients to help support ovulation, which is what's coming up next. So week 3 now, we're into ovulation. This is actually your most social and communicative phase. So this is when Omar finds me like, why are you so social and like a social butterfly all of a sudden? This is me.
I'm like, are you okay? But it kind of makes sense though if you think about it. It's like, if you're ovulating and you're like you said, your body's almost expecting to be pregnant or hopefully to get pregnant. Like you probably are going to be social to where like if you think about it like primally, like you're probably going to be wanting to interact with males and other
100%
species, if you want to so call them that.
No, yeah, it makes sense. But if you think about like what's actually happening on a hormonal level during this phase, so the hormones are actually activating the verbal and social areas of the brain. So that's why you feel a little bit more social, a little bit, and you feel like you're just better at communication. You can find your words more easily. You can express yourself verbally a little bit more clearly. Like this is the time to where like if you had to schedule a really important call with somebody or a really important conversation with your husband or like whatever it is, this is the week of the month to do it. Week 3. That's when you want to have those most important meetings because you're going to be just much more fluid with your communication during this point in time. Movement wise, your testosterone is at its highest. So this is when you're actually going to have even more energy. And so like I said before, most likely this is actually going to be when you're really hitting the PRs. So again, it might happen the previous week for some women, but for a lot of women, I find that this week 3 ovulation, this is when you can push yourself the hardest and really go for it. If you're somebody who you are really interested in maybe trying out some different types of workouts, maybe some like workout classes, things like that, this is probably a good time of the month to do that as well because again, you're more social and you have more energy and you can push yourself a little bit more. You have the capacity to do so. So you can marry those together and be like, hey, maybe it's a good time to try out something a little bit like more unusual that I don't normally do.
I feel like this is like when you guys become just super women. Is that right? Or superwoman?
Oh yeah. No, follicular and ovulatory, this is superwoman mode. This is when you can really show up. Like for me, being a CEO of a company, this is when I feel like just in my flow the most. Like I'm really confident in how I'm showing up and I'm really proud of myself. I like the way I'm showing up in meetings, and I like the way I'm expressing myself at this point in my month. Food-wise, it's really important at this point in the month to make sure that we're getting in plenty of fiber. We want to make sure, of course, we're getting in plenty of fiber all month long, but this is when you should probably just check back in with yourself, be like, where is my fiber at right now? Like if you don't normally track your food and you have no idea, this is a good time of the month to just touch base on that and see where your fiber intake is at. This is because that's going to help move excess hormones through the body, essentially. Like if you are not eating enough fiber, you're probably not going to the bathroom enough. If you're not going to the bathroom enough, you're not excreting excess hormones enough. If we start to hold on to excess hormones, that's when we're going to find ourselves with even more PMS in the next phase.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this enough, but this is the beauty, and this is also, too, I think, the importance of that diet variation, right? If, like you said, if you don't know that during this phase, maybe you should up your fiber a little bit, and instead you're doing the opposite, then no wonder at the end of that part of your cycle, you're feeling like crap because, again, some of that excess hormones that were supposed to come out didn't, right? And so your body just doesn't it doesn't work optimally. It just works normally, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Well, if you're not excreting the excess, then it's just going to kind of recycle back into your body. And that's where now you end up with imbalances. You might be estrogen dominant. You might have too much estrogen.
Right.
And then you might feel okay during the ovulation phase, but it's this next phase, luteal, where suddenly you're going to be like, why do I feel like a crazy person?
Yeah, man.
Probably because of how you're treating yourself during those other weeks.
Yeah. It's such a little puzzle. Like, to be honest, like the more I read about this stuff, the more I get to learn. And again, I go back to
the more you're thankful that you're a man.
Yes. It's seriously though, but that's where I'm like, it comes back to the communication. As guys, we're so ignorant and sometimes probably just dumb. And we're like, oh, like I feel great all the time. Like, why don't you? And then I start to overthink things where ultimately you're literally hormonally changing every week. So of course it makes sense for you guys to be different every single week, right?
Yeah.
But again,
absolutely.
It's that information that helps tremendously.
Yeah. So finally, week 4, your luteal phase. This is when, again, estrogen is falling. And like I said earlier, estrogen and serotonin are like married together. So if estrogen falls, serotonin falls. So what does that mean? We're not as happy.
Lethal. We're lethal.
Well, but also you might feel okay, like happiness level wise, but you might find that your focus level goes down during this phase because that also can be attributed to that decrease in serotonin. So luteal phase, this is typically a really great time of completion. And like, if you think about, again, what's happening biologically in your body, this is really like we're coming to completion of the menstrual cycle. So think about that. Like, that's a good way just to remember that luteal phase, that week or so leading up to your period is a great time to just tie up all the loose ends. Because guess what? Week 2 and week 3, when you're like, week 2, I'm super creative. Week 3, I'm super communicative. I'm like starting all these projects. I'm sharing
4?
all these ideas with different people. Well, guess what? Now we get into week 4. It's like, you got to tie up those loose ends.
Yeah,
you can't just be like, oh, I'm done. I'm like, goodbye. So like, that's where at the beginning of the luteal phase, because the luteal phase is longer, it's typically 10 to 14 days. So if you think about the first half of the luteal phase, you probably still feel pretty good at that point. That's when it's like, all right, time to just wrap things up. Let me like finish up these projects. Let me just, start like getting things completed. And so that then towards the end of the luteal phase, like that, if it's about 2 weeks long, the second week, which I realize that's confusing because I said week 4, but in actuality, your luteal phase is 10 to 14 days. So you might find that it's actually about 2 weeks long. That first part, again, you feel pretty good. It's that fourth week of the month. That's when you need to kind of take a step back. This is a great time, if possible, set some boundaries with your work, lean a little bit more into your personal life. Definitely don't work long work days at this point, and it's okay to take a step back from working long work days because guess what? In 2 weeks, you're going to be feeling awesome and ready to work long days again. So take a little bit of that step back, wrap up those projects. Don't start anything new. Don't take on new projects at this point in time, or else you're going to end up getting irritated, potentially saying or doing something that you eventually regret.
Might regret, yeah.
And 100%, I've been there. Like, I can't tell you how many times that I've had this conversation with Omar where I'm like, I've got to get better at cycle syncing my work with just how I feel, because I'll schedule an important meeting during the luteal phase. I don't like how I show up for that meeting. And then I beat myself up about it for days because I'm already in a more negative place. I didn't like how I showed up because I'm not in a place that's prime for really clear communication. And I don't show up well. And then I beat myself up for it and I spiral.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the nutrition, the training part on this side, or on this particular phase?
Yeah. So food-wise, your metabolism is actually at its highest at this point. So your metabolism speeds up, which is why you might find yourself more hungry. So a lot of people talk about like, oh my gosh, suddenly I feel like I'm just so hungry. I have all these cravings. That's normal. And that's honestly just a sign of a healthy shifting cycle. So rather than getting mad at yourself and be like, oh my gosh, I was perfect with my diet the last 2 weeks, and then I came into this week and I just fell apart. Now I'm beating myself up over it. Now I should just give up on all my goals. Like, no, it's what's happening with your body is your body's burning a little bit more calories at this time of the month. Your metabolism naturally speeds up a little bit more. It's not like huge. It's typically going to be like between 90 and 300 calories more, depending on the person. But because of that, you might just feel a little bit hungrier. So you might need to lean into foods that are a little bit more satiating, a little bit more nutrient dense. So adding a little bit more complex carbs, sweet potato, brown rice, apples, like giving your body nutrient dense foods is going to feel very satisfying, so that then you don't actually feel as intense cravings for, sweets and different things like that because you've been restricting it.
That makes sense.
Movement wise, this is that time of the month that I was alluding to earlier in the podcast when I said that your hormones, your stress hormones, are at their highest. So if you aren't aware of where you are in your cycle and you're trying to keep pushing yourself just week after week after week, you're like, I got to be better than last week. I got to be better than last week, because that's what you're being fed by these male coaches who aren't aware of where you're at in your cycle. Then you will find yourself in this phase actually doing more damage than good. If you push yourself too much, you're jumping into HIIT workouts, you're trying to hit PRs in your strength training, you're just trying to like go and do a lot more during this phase. You are going to put your body into a fat storage mode. You're actually going to gain fat and lose muscle. Your body's not going to be burning fat in those workouts. It's going to be burning muscle. And it's going to be storing fat.
Let's talk about that for a quick second. So essentially what you're saying is, I mean, obviously you're setting yourself up for failure because your body's already stressed, right? So you're adding stress on top of stress, again, kind of what we talked about. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Vanessa, but your body doesn't realize that you're trying to, hit these PRs or try to, do these interval classes. It thinks that something's coming, like it's dying, or there's like a tiger or whatever chasing it, right? Yeah. So it's in this state of fight or flight, basically. So it makes no sense for it to lose the stubborn body fat at that point. Instead, it's going to absorb everything to keep you alive, to help make sure that you're safe. Am I kind of understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
So I really hope that, like, ladies, if I've just like dropped so much information on you and you feel overwhelmed, I think really this is the phase to take the most away from. Really give yourself grace during your luteal phase. Don't overly push yourself in the gym or work, and trust that you're going to have those other points of the month where you can show up as the superhero, the superwoman that you know that you are deep down. But just like I like to think in terms of nature, if we are harvesting something in nature, you can't just continuously harvest. You have to give the field time to grow. You have to let your garden grow before you can harvest the fruits of it. Our bodies as women are built the same way. We cannot just take week after week and not expect to eventually have nothing to take from anymore. That soil needs to be replenished. We need to give our body time to rest, to reset, to recover, so that then we can push hard and really take from our bodies, take from our energy in those other weeks of the month.
Yeah, it's literally like a puzzle, which is so interesting to me.
It really is. But see how like over the course of this episode, you've gone from like this seems overwhelming to like, wow, this is interesting. This is a puzzle. And like once you start to understand how the different pieces fit together, it's really empowering, not just for women, but for the men in your life to actually understand how we work and how we can actually tune up and work in sync with ourselves.
Yeah, and I think it ultimately helps too with accountability, right? Like if I know what you're going through, or what phase of your cycle you're going through, and I see you doing, these crazy like workouts, I'm like, hey, why don't we maybe like, and I would do it very carefully because I know what phase you're in, right? But I'd be like, hey, why don't maybe we just, think about what we're doing here and, potentially give you some options to do it that way. But I think it helps tremendously, again, just with accountability. But it starts with that communication. Like I can't expect to help you if you don't even know what's going on, or I can't expect to help you if you don't tell me how to help you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, one of the reasons I selfishly wanted to do this podcast with you.
You're like, hey, let's do this episode today. I'm like,
well, sure. No, beforehand I was telling him, I'm like, I need some accountability here of I really need to improve. I have a lot of opportunity for improvement on my work, how I cycle sync my work, because even though I've started to acquire this knowledge really in the last 6 months, I haven't really put it into action the way I should. And it's just over the like month after month, cycle after cycle, I become more irritated with myself where I'm like, why do I keep holding myself to the same standards week after week after week? And I'm not leaning into my body's natural inclination to different things during different parts of the month. So rather than saying, okay, Mondays are for this, Tuesdays are for this, Wednesdays are for this, Thursdays are for this, and Fridays are for this, and just repeating that every single week. It needs to be this week is for this, week 2 is for this, week 3 is for this, and week 4 is for this. And of course, I absolutely acknowledge that everybody's work and career and the demands of your work and your career are very different, but there are aspects to what you do, if you take some time to think on this, that you can find ways to optimize different pieces of your work to make sure that it works well with your cycle. So just sharing a little bit of what I want to do within my own work. So that week 1 menstruation, this is for evaluation and intuition. I really do want to make sure that I'm giving myself some grace here, allowing myself to work from the couch with a cozy blanket and doing more of the reflective stuff, not scheduling as many meetings if I can help it, and just really doing that deep work and turning inward. But then the second phase, second week, this is when you're in your follicular phase and you're primed for creativity. this is when I'm going to allow myself now to like actually dive in, start new projects, take lots of meetings, share lots of ideas, and really dive into some problem solving. Now, the next week is ovulation. This is when I'm primed for communication. So maybe during the previous week, I was outlining podcasts. I was starting to create content, but this part, ovulation, this is when I should really be optimizing and recording all of my podcasts back to back to back, not just doing one podcast every week, but really during this part of the month saying, okay, I'm great at communication here. Why don't I lean into this and actually record 4 episodes back to back and dive into my content a little bit more and really make sure that it's top notch when I'm primed for communication. Then that last part of the month, it's not to say, oh, now I'm in my luteal phase, now I like can't work. It's no, this is a great time to do some of the more simple tasks that are a little bit more easily gratifying. So I might push myself to do the more complex things during week 2 and week 3. Week 4 might be time to do more of like the little administrative things that are just tying up loose ends.
Very less, what's the word? Like
less demanding.
Demanding,
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I could actually just have a little bit shorter work days, focus on my personal life a little bit more, and not hold myself to the same standard work-wise. So finally, I do want to say, again, these are all just recommendations. The point of this and why I dove so deep into you understanding the different phases is because you need to actually tune into your body and understand how you feel during different phases of the month and how you can actually start to more naturally, more intuitively phase your work and your social life and your workouts and different things to your body. Don't think you have to follow this like, these strict rules of cycle syncing. Really learn into your natural intuition, lean into it, and feel what feels best for you.
Yeah, and I think it all goes back to what you were saying. When you know the reason why you're doing the things that you're doing, not only does it help you be more efficient, but it decreases your overall stress. It decreases that, that expectation that you have for yourself to always be go, go, go. And instead, like you said, it allows you to give yourself a little bit of grace and just understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling and just be able to interact and do the things you need to do.
Exactly. So if you do want a entire cheat sheet, like written out, something you can even print out and like share with your husband or
put it on your fridge, share it with them.
Yeah. Use it as something to actually reference back. I'm willing to share all of my notes for this podcast, and I'm actually going to put it into a much prettier document so you can print it out and really keep it for yourself. But if you want that, just go on Instagram at Vanessa G Fitness and shoot me a DM that just says, the keyword cycle sync cheat sheet, and I'll make sure I send that right over to you so that hopefully you could start to make some improvements and really optimize your body and your life with your cycle. So thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week.
See you guys.